The Valkyrie moved through space like living starlight. Their bodies glowed with inner fire, shifting between solid form and pure energy as they wished. When they appeared before other species, the reaction was always the same. Every alien fell to their knees, trembling with fear and wonder. For 50,000 years, this had been the way of things across the galaxy. On the water world of Aquanus, the fish-like nereids built massive underwater temples from living coral. They sang praise that traveled through the ocean currents, hoping their songs would reach the ears of the glowing ones. When a Valkyrie finally appeared in their deepest temple, the entire planet stopped to worship. The being reached out with one finger and healed their dying coral reefs with a touch of golden light. The spider creatures of Arachne 7 wove prayer webs that stretched between their moons. Each strand contained billions of silk prayers, written in a language of knots and patterns. Their greatest honor was when a Valkyrie would rest in their webs, causing the entire structure to glow like a caught star. In return, the god being would grant them knowledge of new weaving techniques that could create materials stronger than metal. Even the warrior race called the Kreks, who lived for battle and conquest, threw down their weapons when the Valkyrie appeared. Their strongest fighters would offer their own life force to the energy beings, hoping to gain even a fraction of their power. The Valkyrie would sometimes accept these offerings, draining the life from willing warriors and growing brighter in return. The galaxy had been shaped by this worship. Trade routes existed not for profit, but to carry pilgrims between holy worlds. Massive temple ships, some the size of small moons, drifted between star systems. Inside these ships, millions of believers from hundreds of different species lived together in prayer. They gave up their old lives, their families, everything they owned, just for the chance to serve the Ascended Ones. The Valkyrie themselves lived in places between the stars, in spaces that normal matter could not reach. They fed on the energy of dying suns and the prayers of believers. When they chose to interact with the physical universe, reality itself seemed to bend around them. They could walk through solid walls, heal any wound with a touch, or destroy entire armies by thinking violent thoughts. Their power seemed to have no limits. During the Great War of Centauri, when 12 species fought over mining rights to a neutron star, a single Valkyrie appeared above the battlefield. The god being simply gestured, and every weapon in the war fleet turned to harmless water. Another gesture froze all the warships in place. The warriors inside found they could not move, could not speak, could only listen as the Valkyrie spoke directly into their minds. "Your violence disturbs the cosmic order," the being said, without moving its mouth. "Learn peace or learn suffering." When it vanished, the war was over. The 12 species signed a peace treaty that same day. On the desert world of Kara, a plague swept through the population, turning their blue skin black and causing painful death within hours. The local priests prayed for 7 days and 7 nights without stopping. On the 8th day, 3 Valkyrie appeared like golden flames in their greatest temple. The lad being, whose light was brighter than the others, simply breathed across the planet. The plague vanished instantly. Every sick person was healed. Even those who had already died returned to life, confused but grateful. But the Valkyrie were not always merciful. The mining colony on asteroid Base Gamma made the mistake of trying to study a piece of Valkyrie technology they found floating in space. The device was beautiful, a crystal that seemed to contain a tiny star. When their scientists tried to take it apart, they managed to scan its internal structure before it vanished in a flash of light. 3 days later, every person on the base was found dead. Their bones had been turned to glass while they still lived. Their faces were frozen in expressions of terrible pain. When other species found the base, the only message left behind was burned into the asteroid's surface in letters of melted rock. Do not seek to understand the divine. This was the lesson that every species in the galaxy learned. The Valkyrie were beyond understanding, beyond questioning, beyond everything except worship and obedience. To try to study them was death. To oppose them was death. To ignore them was death. The only safe path was to fall to your knees and pray. Some species tried to understand where the Valkyrie came from. Ancient texts spoke of a time before their arrival, when the galaxy was darker and more violent. Wars raged between species with no one to stop them. Planets died in nuclear fire. Entire star systems were consumed by machines that turned matter into more machines. Then the Valkyrie appeared, bringing order through their overwhelming power. They ended wars, healed worlds, and taught the surviving species to live in peace. Over thousands of years, civilization grew under their guidance. Art flourished. Knowledge spread. The galaxy became a better place, but it was built on fear as much as love. No one dared to ask where the Valkyrie really came from. No one questioned why beings of such power needed worship from lesser creatures. No one wondered if there might be other ways to live, other forms of government, other types of leaders. The very idea was unthinkable. The Valkyrie were facts of existence, like gravity or time. You did not question gravity. You did not argue with time. And you certainly did not challenge the gods who could turn your bones to glass with a thought. For 50,000 years, this truth held firm across every world, every species, every corner of the known galaxy. Then the humans arrived. And they asked the one question no one had ever dared to ask. What makes them so special? Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the human ship, Curiosity, as it approached the holy world of Kethmoran. Around her, the crew worked at their stations with typical human efficiency. No one was praying. No one was preparing offerings. The diplomatic team was reviewing scientific data instead of religious texts. This worried the alien ambassadors traveling with them. Ambassador Decalon of the Aquinas delegation had been swimming in nervous circles in his water tank for 3 days. His translator device crackled with anxiety as he spoke. Captain, your people must understand. The Valkyrie are not beings you negotiate with. They are forces of nature. You pray to them. You serve them. You hope they notice you kindly. Elena adjusted her dark hair and checked her equipment belt. Her plasma sidearm hung next to scientific scanners and data tablets. Ambassador, my people have a saying. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. What does that mean? Asked Ambassador Decalon. It means we'll figure out what to do when we meet them. This answer made the aquatic alien sink deeper into his tank in despair. Dr. James Chun, the mission's lead scientist, looked up from his readings. He was a thin man with curious eyes that never stopped moving. Captain, I'm picking up some interesting energy signatures from the planet. The patterns don't match what we were told about pure energy beings. Explain, Elena said, moving to look at his screen. Well, if they were truly beings of pure energy, we should see constant electromagnetic emissions. Instead, I'm detecting quantum field fluctuations that suggest something more complex. Like they exist in multiple dimensional states at once, shifting between them. Elena nodded. Keep monitoring. I want to know everything about these so-called gods before we meet them. The word so-called made every alien diplomat on the bridge make sounds of horror. In their languages, such words range from religious blasphemy to threats that could start wars. But the humans continued their work as if they had simply been discussing the weather. 3 hours later, they landed on Kethmoran. The holy world was covered in temples made from crystal that sang in the wind. Each structure reached toward the sky like frozen music, and when the light hit them right, they created rainbows that could be seen from orbit. Millions of pilgrims from dozens of species moved between the temples in slow, reverent processions. The human delegation walked through this scene like tourists at a museum. They took pictures, made notes, and asked questions about architecture instead of expressing religious awe. Fascinating construction, noted Dr. Sarah Kim, the team's engineer. These crystals are grown, not carved. The resonance frequencies suggest they're tuned for specific energy types. Energy types that match our readings of Volcari signatures, added Dr. Chun, scanning everything with his instruments. The other delegates moved in traditional religious procession. Heads bowed, footsteps slow and respectful. The humans walked at normal speed, heads up, eyes alert and curious. The contrast was so obvious that pilgrims stopped their prayers to stare at these strange beings who seemed unafraid at the great temple. They were met by priests of 12 different species. Each priest wore robes that matched their species' interpretation of holy clothing. The leader was a tall, silver-skinned humanoid called a Zilani. "Welcome, beings from Earth," the Zilani priest said in carefully practiced human language. "I am High Priest Velshan. You have come to pay proper homage to the Ascended Ones." Elena stepped forward. "Actually, we've come to establish diplomatic relations and exchange scientific knowledge." The silence that followed was so complete that the crystal temples stopped singing. "You wish to speak with them as equals?" Velshan asked. "We wish to speak with them," Elena replied simply. Before Velshan could explain why this was impossible, the air above the temple began to glow. Light gathered into a tall humanoid shape that seemed to be made from liquid starfire. When the figure fully appeared, every alien in sight fell to their knees. The few who were physically unable to kneel pressed themselves against the ground in whatever way their bodies allowed. The humans remained standing. The Volcari being regarded them with eyes like tiny suns. When it spoke, its voice came from everywhere at once, resonating through the crystal structures around them. "I am Zethavel of the Ascended. You are the humans who do not bow." "We are," Elena replied. "We've traveled far to meet you." Dr. Chung kept his scanners running, recording everything. The readings were getting more interesting by the second. Energy patterns that suggested the being was not actually in this dimension, but projecting itself here from somewhere else. And the quantum signatures were becoming clearer. Ze Tiveva's glow brightened. For 50,000 years, every species has shown proper respect upon first meeting us. You stand before divinity itself and show no reverence. "We show respect," Elena said carefully. "But we don't worship what we don't understand." The temperature around the temple began to rise. The crystal structures started glowing brighter, responding to Zethavel's increasing energy output. "Understanding is not required," the being said. "Only obedience." Zethavel raised one hand. Fingers spread toward Elena. This was the gesture that had turned the bones of the asteroid-based Gamma colonists to glass. Every alien witness held their breath, certain they were about to watch the humans die horribly. Elena felt a strange tingling sensation, like static electricity. Her military-grade bio-armor, designed to protect against various energy weapons, began to hum softly as its systems activated. Dr. Chun's scanner started beeping rapidly. "Captain," Chun said quietly, "the field manipulation is affecting local quantum states, but your armor is dispersing the energy. And I'm reading something important. When he tries to affect matter, he has to lock himself into our dimensional state. He becomes solid." Elena looked at Zethavel, who was staring at his hand with what might have been confusion. The bone-turning effect that had never failed before was not working. "Interesting," she said, and drew her plasma sidearm. The weapon was crude by galactic standards. Humans had only been in space for 2 centuries, compared to species that had traveled to stars for millennia. But it was designed to punch through armor and disable electronic systems with electromagnetic pulse effects. Zethavel was still locked in physical form, trying to understand why his power had failed. He was solid, present, And vulnerable for the first time in centuries, Elena fired. The plasma bolt hit Zethavol's center mass. The being screamed, a sound like breaking crystal that shattered windows in 3 temples. His perfect energy form flickered, showing something underneath that looked far more ordinary. Golden light sprayed from the wound like blood. For the first time in 50,000 years, a god bled. Zethavol collapsed to his knees, staring at the hole in his chest with eyes wide with shock and pain. Around the temple, 1,000,000 pilgrims watched in absolute silence as their understanding of the universe cracked and fell apart. The first god in galactic history was dying, and the humans had killed him. The news of Zethavol's death spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. The Valkyrie had ways of communicating that no other species understood, sending information through dimensions that existed between thoughts. Within hours, every god being in the galaxy knew that one of their own had been murdered by the strange creatures called humans. Their reaction was immediate and terrible. On 17 worlds, the sky turned red as Valkyrie materialized in their full wrath. The beings who had been distant, benevolent figures became forces of pure destruction. On New Centauri, a Valkyrie named Morthek appeared above the capital city and began to pull the heat from every living thing. 1,000,000 people froze to death in seconds, their breath turning to ice crystals in the suddenly Arctic air. On the mining world of Kepler Station, another god being turned the atmosphere itself into acid. The protective domes that kept the miners alive dissolved like sugar in rain. On Tau Ceti Prime, a Valkyrie reached into the planet's core and began to destabilize it. The world would tear itself apart within weeks. But these attacks were not random. Every world that died had one thing in common. They had expressed curiosity about the humans after hearing news of Zethavol's death. The message was clear. Any species that showed interest in the god-killers would share their fate. Most of the galaxy fell in line immediately. Ancient species that had survived for millions of years by knowing when to fight and when to surrender quickly declared war on humanity. The Aquanus sent their deep space fleets. The spider creatures of Arachna 7 launched web ships that could capture entire solar systems. Even the peaceful tree beings of Gaia 7 began growing, battle forests that could move between stars. But in dark corners of the galaxy, other voices whispered dangerous questions. On the trading station Deep Haven, a Krex warrior named Grektar stared at the security footage of Zethavol's death. He had watched it 17 times, studying every frame. "If the gods can bleed," he said to his companion, "then they can die. If they can die, then they are not gods." His companion, a nervous Zilani trader, looked around to make sure no one was listening. "You should not speak such thoughts. The Valkyrie will hear." "Let them hear," Grektar growled. "For 50,000 years, we have been slaves pretending to be worshippers. Maybe it is time to remember what freedom looks like." Similar conversations were happening across hundreds of worlds. The absolute certainty that the Valkyrie were untouchable had been shattered. If humans could kill one god, perhaps other gods could be killed too. Meanwhile, humanity prepared for war. Dr. Chun worked around the clock in laboratories on Earth, studying every piece of data from the encounter with Zethavol. The readings from his scanner during the god's death had revealed crucial information about how the Valkyrie actually functioned. "They're not energy beings," he explained to a room full of military leaders and scientists. "They exist in quantum superposition, shifting between multiple dimensional states. When they interact with our universe, they have to lock themselves into our physical dimension. And when they do that, they become vulnerable to conventional weapons." Admiral Sarah Chun, the doctor's daughter and Earth's highest-ranking military officer, studied the data carefully. "So how do we force them to become solid?" "Electromagnetic interference," Dr. Chun replied. Their quantum fields are delicate. Enough M radiation will destabilize their dimensional shifting and trap them in physical form. How much interference do we need? Dr. Chun smiled grimly. The good news is that our technology is already perfect for this. Every human ship, every human weapon, every human power system produces massive electromagnetic interference compared to other species. We build things that work, not things that are elegant. That chaos is exactly what we need. The first anti-Valkyrie warships launched from Earth's shipyards 3 months after Zethavol's death. They were ugly, brutal vessels with no graceful curves or artistic designs. Their hulls were covered in sensor arrays, impulse generators, and enough weapons to level a small moon. They looked like flying scrap metal compared to the elegant ships other species built. But they worked. The first battle happened in the Vega system when a Valkyrie named Ashvar appeared to destroy a human colony ship. The god being materialized in space like a small star, ready to boil the humans alive inside their metal shell. Instead, Ashvar suddenly found himself unable to phase between dimensions. The human ship was broadcasting so much electromagnetic noise that it was like trying to swim through solid concrete. Locked into physical form, the Valkyrie was just another target. The human ship opened fire with every weapon it had. Plasma cannons, particle beams, kinetic projectiles, and focused bursts. Ashvar screamed as pieces of his energy body were blown away, golden light bleeding into space. Within minutes, the second god in galactic history was dead. The Valkyrie response was swift and overwhelming. They abandoned their distant, mysterious behavior and began to wage open war. Beings who had spent millennia floating in peace between dimensions suddenly remembered they were creatures of vast power and terrible anger. They attacked human colonies with forces that could crack planets. They turned suns unstable, created gravity wells that crushed space stations, and wielded energies that most species could not even measure. When the Valkyrie stopped holding back, their power was truly godlike. But humans had advantages the god beings had never faced before. First, humans had no religious reverence to overcome, where other species still hesitated to truly harm a Valkyrie. Even in self-defense, humans treated them as enemy combatants to be studied, tracked, and eliminated. Second, human technology was perfectly suited for fighting energy beings, while other species built precise, elegant devices that produced minimal electromagnetic interference. Human equipment was loud, chaotic, and produced massive amounts of background radiation that disrupted Valkyrie abilities. Third, humans approached the war like an extermination campaign rather than a religious conflict. They studied Valkyrie migration patterns, feeding habits, and reproduction cycles. They set traps in dimensional fold spaces and poisoned nebulae that the energy beings used for sustenance. Most importantly, humans learned from every encounter. Each dead Valkyrie taught them something new about energy being physiology. Each battle provided data about weaknesses and attack patterns. Admiral Chun established the Department of Divine Warfare, a military unit dedicated entirely to fighting gods. Their motto was simple: if it claims to be immortal, we'll prove it wrong. The first god-killer ships were crude prototypes, but each new generation was more effective. Human engineers added quantum destabilizers, dimensional anchor points, and electromagnetic pulse bombs powerful enough to force an entire group of Valkyrie into solid form at once. Within a year, human fleets were hunting the god beings across the galaxy. They tracked energy signatures through hyperspace, set ambushes at cosmic phenomena the Valkyrie frequented, and developed weapons specifically designed to kill immortal energy beings. The galaxy watched in amazement and terror as the impossible happened again and again. Gods died. Beings who had ruled for 50,000 years fell before creatures who had barely learned to travel between stars. Some species began to quietly support the humans, sending them intelligence about Valkyrie movements and locations. Others doubled down on their worship, hoping their devotion would protect them when the war ended. But in the deepest parts of space, where the oldest Valkyrie dwelt in places beyond normal reality, ancient beings who had not interacted with the physical universe for millennia began to wake up. They had felt their younger brethren dying, and they were not pleased. The war was about to become much worse. The war lasted 12 years and touched every corner of the galaxy. What started as a conflict between humans and gods became something else entirely: the systematic hunting and elimination of a species that had ruled supreme for 50 millennia. Admiral Sarah Chun stood before a massive holographic display in Earth's Strategic Command Center. Red dots marked known Valkyrie locations, while blue lines tracked human hunter fleets moving to intercept them. The map looked like a three-dimensional spider web stretched across the galaxy, with Earth at its center. "Status report," she ordered. Commander Torres, a veteran of 30 god kills, consulted his datapad. Hunter Fleet 7 has confirmed the elimination of 3 Valkyrie in the Andromeda Nebula. Fleet 12 is tracking a group of 5 through the Horsehead region. And Fleet 3, he paused. Fleet 3 found something interesting. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Define interesting? A Valkyrie nursery, Admiral. A place where they reproduce. The room fell silent. In 12 years of war, they had learned much about the energy beings, but reproduction had remained a mystery. Finding where new Valkyrie came from was like discovering the location of a weapons factory. "Show me," Sarah said. The holographic display shifted to show a region of space that officially did not exist. It was a gap between galaxies, a void where normal matter became something else entirely. Here, the Valkyrie had built structures that existed in multiple dimensions at once, feeding grounds where they converted cosmic radiation into new life. "How many?" Sarah asked. "Sensors indicate approximately 300 adult Valkyrie and several thousand immature forms," Taurus replied. "It's the largest concentration we've ever found." Sarah studied the display for a long moment. 300 gods in one location. A year ago, such a number would have been impossible to fight. But humanity had learned much about killing immortals. "Prepare Operation Divine Purge," she ordered. "We end this." The operation took 3 months to plan. Every available hunter fleet was repositioned. New weapons were built specifically for the assault. Human scientists worked with the few alien species brave enough to openly support them, sharing data and technology. The Krex warrior Grektar had become one of humanity's most valuable allies. His people's warrior culture had eventually overcome the religious programming, and Krex ships now flew alongside human vessels. Grektar himself commanded a mixed fleet of human and Krex vessels, hunting gods with the enthusiasm of a predator that had found perfect prey. "The human approach to war is educational," Grektar explained to his second-in-command during the preparation phase. "They do not seek honor or glory. They seek results. When they decide something must die, they make sure it dies." Dr. Chun had spent years studying captured Valkyrie technology and remains. His research had revealed crucial information about the energy being's life cycle and weaknesses. "They feed on cosmic radiation and prayer energy," he explained to a gathering of human and allied scientists. "But they also require quantum anchor points, physical locations where they can stabilize their existence. Without these anchors, they cannot maintain coherence across dimensions. So if we destroy their anchor points," began Dr. Kim. "They die," Chun finished. "Not just in our dimension, but in all dimensions. True death, with no possibility of return." The nursery was built around a dying star, using its collapse to create the dimensional instabilities the Valkyrie needed for reproduction. The anchor points were massive crystal structures that orbited the star, each one containing enough quantum stabilizers to support dozens of energy beings. When the human fleets arrived, they came prepared. Admiral Chun's flagship, the Divine Bane, led a force of 200 ships from 6 different species. Each vessel bristled with impulse generators, quantum destabilizers, and weapons designed specifically for fighting energy beings. The fleet moved through space like a pack of hunters, surrounding wounded prey. The Valkyrie response was immediate and overwhelming. 300 gods materialized in space around their nursery, ready to defend it with everything they had. They unleashed powers that had never been used in war before, reaching into stars to pull out solar fire, creating gravity wells that crushed space itself, and attacking with energies that existed in colors the human eye could not see. But humanity had learned from 12 years of god-killing. The human ship spread into a formation that looked chaotic but was actually carefully planned. Each vessel generated massive electromagnetic interference, creating overlapping fields that made it impossible for the Valkyrie to phase between dimensions. Trapped in physical form, the energy beings found themselves fighting a conventional space battle for the first time in their existence. And humans were very good at conventional space battles. "Target their anchor crystals," Admiral Chun ordered. "Every god we kill is temporary, unless we destroy what keeps them stable." Human ships focused their fire on the massive crystal structures orbiting the dying star. Each crystal that shattered sent waves of pain through the Valkyrie connected to it. Energy beings that had existed for millennia suddenly found themselves mortal, vulnerable, and afraid. The battle lasted 18 hours. By the end, space around the dying star was filled with the dissipating energy of dead gods. The crystal anchors were shattered fragments. The nursery that had created new Valkyrie for thousands of years was nothing but cosmic dust. But the real victory was not in the deaths themselves. It was in what the battle represented. "We've broken their cycle," Dr. Chun reported after analyzing the aftermath. This was their primary breeding ground. Without it, they cannot easily replace their losses. Admiral Chun nodded grimly. "How many are left?" "Best estimates suggest fewer than 50 adult Valkyrie remain in the galaxy. They're scattered, isolated, and cut off from their support structures. 50 gods left from a species that had once numbered in the thousands. Each one was still incredibly powerful, still capable of destroying planets or killing millions with a thought. But they were no longer an unlimited force. They were a finite problem with a calculable solution. The final phase of the war became a cleanup operation. Human hunter fleets tracked down the remaining Valkyrie one by one, using the systematic approach that had served them throughout the conflict. They studied energy signatures, tracked dimensional wake patterns, and predicted where the surviving gods would go. Some Valkyrie tried to hide in places between dimensions, but human scientists had learned to follow them there. Others attempted to possess members of other species, but electromagnetic pulse bombs could force them back into physical form. A few tried to negotiate, offering ancient knowledge in exchange for their lives. Humanity's response was always the same: gods don't get to negotiate. The last battle took place in a system so remote it had never been named, just cataloged as G7739. Here, the final 12 Valkyrie had gathered, hoping to make one final stand or perhaps find some way to escape the galaxy entirely. They never got the chance. Human ships surrounded the system, using quantum destabilizers to lock down every possible escape route. The battle was brief and efficient. 12 gods died in the span of 6 hours, their energy forms dispersing into the cosmic background radiation. When it was over, Admiral Chun stood on the bridge of her flagship and made an announcement that was broadcast across the galaxy. "The war is over. The Valkyrie are extinct. The silence that followed was not peaceful. It was the silence of a galaxy that had lost its gods and was not sure what came next. 50,000 years of divine rule had ended not with cosmic judgment or prophetic fulfillment, but with systematic extermination by creatures who refused to believe that anything was too powerful to kill. The age of gods was over. The age of questions was about to begin. 5 years after the last Valkyrie died, the galaxy was a very different place. Dr. James Chung walked through what used to be the great temple on Kathmoran. The crystal structures still sang in the wind, but the sound had changed from worship songs to something that sounded more like questions. Where once millions of pilgrims had prayed to gods, now thousands of scientists from dozens of species worked to understand how the universe actually functioned. "It's remarkable," said Dr. Vexara, a Zilani researcher who had been a temple priest before the war. "The quantum manipulation technology we've reverse-engineered from Valkyrie remains has advanced our understanding of physics by centuries." Chun nodded, checking his scanner readings as they walked past a device that had once been used to focus prayer energy. Human engineers had converted it into a dimensional research station. The irony is that they could have taught us all of this while they were alive. Instead, they chose to be worshipped. "Perhaps," Vexara said thoughtfully, "they needed to be worshipped. Perhaps without that constant flow of belief and prayer energy, they were not as powerful as they appeared." This was one of the great discoveries of the post-war period. Analysis of Valkyrie technology suggested that the energy beings had indeed drawn power from the faith of their worshippers. The massive temple networks across the galaxy had not just been religious centers, but energy collection systems. The more species that believed in their divinity, the more godlike they became. It explained much about their behavior. Why they had punished those who questioned them so harshly. Why they had encouraged religious devotion across the galaxy. Why they had seemed so desperate to stop humanity's scientific approach to understanding them. They had not been gods who chose to be worshipped. They had been powerful beings who needed worship to maintain their godhood. Admiral Sarah Chun received daily reports from across the galaxy as humanity worked to fill the power vacuum left by divine extinction. It was not a simple task. 50,000 years of civilization built around God worship did not adapt quickly to self-governance. Some species had collapsed entirely. The ethereal ones of Sigma Draconis had literally faded away when their gods died, their entire existence apparently tied to Valkyrie blessing. Other species had fallen into chaos, with religious wars erupting between those who blamed Valkyrie for deceiving them and those who blamed humanity for destroying divine order. But many others were adapting with surprising speed. The Kreks had embraced their new freedom with typical warrior enthusiasm. Without gods to enforce peace, they had expected to return to their old ways of constant warfare. Instead, they discovered that fighting alongside humans had taught them new concepts like strategy, logistics, and technological development. Krek's battle fleets now served as galactic peacekeepers, protecting smaller species from those who had turned to chaos. The Aquanus had redirected their engineering skills from building temples to building space stations. Their underwater construction techniques, refined over millennia of temple building, proved perfectly suited for creating orbital habitats. Within 3 years, they had become the galaxy's leading builders of space infrastructure. Even the spider creatures of Arachna 7 had found new purpose. Their prayer webs, originally designed to carry worship across space, made excellent communication networks. They now managed information flow between star systems, their silk-based technology proving more efficient than conventional quantum communications. "It's working," Admiral Chun told the Galactic Coordination Council during one of their monthly meetings. "Species that spent 50 millennia as worshippers are learning to be citizens." Ambassador Thecalon, now representing the Aquinas in secular government rather than religious ceremonies, gestured agreement with his tentacles. The transition has been difficult, but educational. We are discovering capabilities we never knew we possessed. But it was the humans who had become the most changed by their victory. Before the war, humanity had been newcomers to galactic civilization, struggling to find their place among species with millions of years of history. Now, they found themselves in the strange position of being simultaneously feared and needed by every other species in the galaxy. Feared, because they had proven that nothing was too sacred or too powerful for them to question and destroy. Needed, because they were the only species with the technology and knowledge to understand and utilize the legacy left by dead gods. Human research stations dotted former temple worlds, where teams of scientists worked to decode Valkyrie technology. Human military fleets patrolled trade routes, protecting species that were still learning to protect themselves. Human diplomats mediated disputes between civilizations that had never needed to negotiate before, because gods had always settled their disagreements. Dr. Chen's daughter, Lisa, had become one of the leading experts in post-divine psychology. She studied how species adapted to life without gods, and her work was helping entire civilizations overcome religious trauma. The most interesting cases, she explained to her father during one of his visits to her research station, are the species that are discovering they're happier without gods. The Valkyrie prevented technological and social development by providing easy answers to every problem. Now that these species have to solve problems themselves, they're innovating at incredible rates. Chun smiled. Your grandfather would have loved to see this. He always said that the best teacher was necessity. Speaking of necessity, Lisa said, her expression becoming more serious, have you seen the latest deep space surveys? Chen's smile faded. The anomalies? 7 different exploration fleets have reported encounters with something. Structures that exist in patterns our instruments can barely detect. Energies that make Valkyrie power look like a flashlight. This was the galaxy's new nightmare. In the deep spaces between galaxies, human exploration ships had begun detecting signs of other entities. Things that were older than the Valkyrie, larger than the Valkyrie, and potentially far more dangerous than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The entities did not seem interested in worship or communication. They simply existed in places where reality became thin, doing things that human science could not yet comprehend. Some theorists suggested they were the Valkyrie's creators, or perhaps the beings that the Valkyrie had originally hidden from by coming to this galaxy. Others believed they might be the natural predators of god beings, drawn to this galaxy by the massive energy release of Valkyrie deaths. Are they a threat? Chun asked. Unknown, Lisa replied. They don't seem to notice us yet. But if they're anything like the Valkyrie were before they became gods. She did not need to finish the sentence. Both scientists understood the implications. Admiral Chun received similar reports from her deep space reconnaissance fleets. Things moving in the void between galaxies. Structures being built from materials that violated known physics. Entities that existed on scales so vast that entire solar systems might be nothing more than atoms in their bodies. The galaxy's response was typically human. They began preparing new research initiatives focused on understanding these cosmic entities. Military programs developed weapons and defenses based on lessons learned from fighting gods. Diplomatic corps trained for contact with beings that might be to the Valkyrie what the Valkyrie had been to ordinary mortals, and across 1,000 worlds. A new generation was growing up with a distinctly human perspective on the universe. These children had never known divine rule, had never been taught that some things were beyond questioning. They looked at the mysteries of the cosmos with curiosity rather than fear. Dr. Chun often visited schools on various worlds, talking to these post-divine children about science and exploration. Their questions amazed him. "If there are bigger things than gods," asked the young Aquinas student, "does that mean we can kill them too?" "If we need to," Chan answered honestly. Another child, this one from a species that had worshipped the Valkyrie for 10,000 years, raised her hand. "Are humans gods now?" Chan smiled. "No. And if we ever start acting like gods, I give you permission to ask us the same questions we asked the Valkyrie." "What makes you so special?" the child repeated, understanding immediately. "Exactly." The galaxy continued to change, adapt, and grow. Former temple worlds became universities. Prayer ships became exploration vessels. Species that had spent millennia in religious stagnation began reaching toward the stars with new purpose and understanding. And in the deep spaces between galaxies, ancient things older than gods took notice of the creatures who had learned to kill immortals and began to move in their direction. The age of gods was over. The age of questions had begun. And when humanity encountered the next impossible thing that claimed to be beyond death, their response would be the same as always: prove it.